All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. Tonight, we are hosting Alina Boyden in celebration of the release of Gifting Fire, which is her second novel. Just come out, the sequel to Stealing Thunder, which came out about this time last year. I know I don't have them with me because I read the digital advanced copies.
That's okay.
But I read them and
I myself.
Them. And it has been a week for me to get to the store and grab them. But we are celebrating Gifting Fire, which is a wonderful fantasy novel. It's very exciting, lots of action, lots of adventure, lots of wonderful character development. And that's what we're here for. So for those of you joining us, you can see on the right-hand side of your screen the comment section. So please feel free to drop any notes or excitement or just general merriment in the comments section. And then below us, you will see first a button that says how to order a copy of Gifting Fire. That will take you to our website at Mysterious Galaxy, where you can get your own copy of Gifting Fire or Stealing Thunder. And you'll also find below me the Ask a Question button, where you can drop any questions you have for Alina. And please do drop those questions. And then you can also look through once we have some questions there, and feel free to upvote any that you really want to make sure that we answer, because we will go to those first. We will give the people what they want, in this context at least. So with that, I'm going to give a short introduction. And I just realized I didn't introduce myself. Not that anyone's here to see me, but my name is Jenni. I'm one of the co-owners of Mysterious Galaxy, and I will be your host and tour guide for the evening. And with me is the lovely Alina Boyden. Alina Boyden is a cultural anthropologist focused on organized community of transgender women in Pakistan. And she focused on how they use their unique community organization to advance the fight for their rights at home and abroad, something which has inspired her as a transgender woman in her own battles for civil rights in the US, as she has fought for transgender care in a major court case with the ACLU. And apparently tonight is a stutter night for me.
That's all right.
But welcome, Alina.
Thank you.
So to start with, I would just really love if you could share a little bit about your books with us. For those listeners who may not have had a chance to pick them up yet, and kind of what they're about and how they came to be, I guess.
Sure. So Stealing Thunder is my first novel. That's this one there. And Stealing Thunder I wrote when I was an unpubbed author. A lot of people, they get started writing and they want to get published, and it takes a really long time to get published. And so Stealing Thunder, I didn't have an agent, I didn't have an editor, nothing fancy. I was just writing, and it was for my friends and for myself. It's always hard as an author to sum up your books. And so I was trying to sum up, I remember after Stealing Thunder came out, what the book was. And my younger brother was like, isn't it just like Pretty Woman in the Mughal Empire with dragons? And I was like, dude, yeah, that's pretty close. And so it's kind of that. It's about a trans woman who was the crown prince of an empire in a fantasy kingdom that's based on the Mughal Empire. And she then goes on adventures as a courtesan, meets a prince, falls in love with him, gets him in trouble because she fell in love with him, and then they have to fight their way out of the situation, and that's the book. And so it's kind of things. She steals things because she's also a skilled thief, of course, because it's a lovely fantasy trope, and it's great. So she's a cool character. I really enjoyed writing her, and I was lucky enough to be able to do a sequel, which is Gifting Fire. And Gifting Fire is, I think that Stealing Thunder is sort of like the fairy tale story, and Gifting Fire is like, be careful what you wish for, because there's the kind of meme that goes around that's like, oh, you want to be a princess? I'm going to marry you at 13 to some guy you've never met, and then you'll have to live with him because of a political alliance. And that's sort of what Gifting Fire is. It's like, oh, you want to be a princess? We'll treat you that way then. And it's not great being a princess. Princesses kind of don't have it easy. So, and then I was just like, well, I'm a trans girl princess, so I'm going to just not accept that and go my own way. And she does. And so that's the book. And those books came out of my sort of love of South Asian culture, my experiences with trans women in South Asia. And when I was first writing fantasy novels with trans women characters, I kept running into the problem of, in Western society, especially for me growing up, when I was young, I transitioned in 2002. And when I transitioned, people were like, what's a transgender? Like, I don't know what you mean by this. Like, what is this thing? I've never met somebody like this before. We run into this problem less now, but at the time there was almost no trans visibility. And so the idea of a trans person was new to a lot of people. But in South Asia, trans women have lived in these very visible communities for centuries, if not millennia. And there are, therefore, everyone knows what a trans person is. At least what a trans woman is. Trans men don't have the kind of visibility in South Asia that trans women do. But anyway, so the point is that when I was writing, I was like, oh, if I set it in a sort of South Asian society, then I end up with a situation where there's not just one trans woman, there's many trans women, and people know who they are and what their deal is. And that's great. That's a really cool thing that's not been done in fantasy before. And so I was really excited to do it. And I was really excited to draw on my experiences living in South Asia. And I hope I did it well. So.
Yeah, the community, I think, in the book is really great because you see kind of that community that you're talking about where it is an openly acknowledged community at the very least, but it is still a community that is set a bit removed within it. Like there's still challenges to being a part of that community, but it is different in the way that that community itself is well known, right? It's not it's not out of focus or out of the spotlight even. Right. This is a fairy tale trope, right? There is a prince, right, who is central and openly with Razia. And that happens very early on in Stealing Thunder, which I think is really great. Could you say a little?
Go ahead. What's your question?
No, I was going to say, if you could say a little bit more about how did your experience as a researcher inform your practice as a creative writer? Because I know in the introduction to Stealing Thunder, I believe you mentioned writing previous books and being a creative writer for a long time before Stealing Thunder came out. And so how do you think that, I guess either way, even, how do you think that interest shaped your research, but how did your research also shape how you approached writing in this context as well?
So for me, I'm an over-researcher. Whenever I write a book, I research way too much about it, the subject, because I love research. And so I've always loved research. I'm the kind of person where if I'm writing a book, that takes place at sea or something, I have to have every book on every ship that was ever made, and I have to know the individual construction types, and I have to know like where everything is, and I have to know details. And then I put about like 0.5% of that into the books. It always ends up being some microscopic percentage of the research actually gets into the books, but I enjoy the research. And so I tell myself that it's useful and important. It probably isn't. I could probably just write them with no research and it would probably be okay. But that's not the way that I operate. I tend to have to research every aspect of it. I tend, when I write books, to have to eat the food that's in the books. I have to cook the meals that are in the books. I have to do a lot of the things that are in the books. I have to try rock climbing, even if I'm not very good at it. Try Kathak dancing, even though I'm terrible at it. So I have to really dig into the material in order to write, and that's just my process. So I think that being an academic researcher actually more came out of being a researcher for writing than anything else. I like to research for writing, and I was doing, actually I ended up in anthropology because I was working at a job that I sort of didn't like because I was in charge of like finances, which was crazy. I can't believe they let me do that because I'm not the kind of person.
Nobody should let me anywhere near that.
Right. I was like, what are you doing? But I had to pay taxes for a company and stuff. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But in the interim, I was working on a novel. This one was about like the Paleolithic and Neanderthals. And I had some questions about Neanderthals. And so I emailed this professor at Duke University about Neanderthals, not realizing how busy professors at Duke University were. And he very kindly got back to me and set up a coffee date to talk about Neanderthals. And at the end of the coffee date, he was like, you know more about Neanderthals than most of my grad students. Why don't you come work in my lab? And so I said, okay. And I went and worked in his lab. And then from there went to get my first master's degree was in paleoanthropology, actually, in the Paleolithic, as a result of research for a novel. And then I realized, like, I don't really want to stare at rocks for the rest of my life when trans women are suffering all over the world. So why don't I do something that's a little more meaningful? And so that's when I switched my research focus to work with trans women in South Asia. So
that's great. That's such a... I don't know if I've heard that trajectory before, like the creative to the research, as opposed to the research to the creative. And that's really fun. I don't know. I love researching too. I like reading books that teach me things, I guess, is the very simplest way that I can phrase it. And I've always kind of been that way. So that's awesome. And I don't know, I can connect with that for sure. In Stealing Thunder and Gifting Fire, some of the biggest forces or figures in these books are the Zahaks. So I have tons of questions about the Zahaks because I would love to talk about them. But first, for people who don't know, could you describe the Zahaks and what they are to the culture of the book? I know, I noticed those and I was like,
yeah. My mom taught me those. Yeah, they're little Zahaks.
So great.
So Zahaks stem from the fact that I hate dragons. Fundamentally, that's what it comes down to. Is I've always loved fantasy and I've always hated dragons, and everybody loves dragons, and they, and that's fine, but they're not aerodynamic. They couldn't actually fly. Drogon from Game of Thrones would fall out of the sky. I actually did the calculations, and you could put I think 3 747 engines on Drogon, and he still wouldn't fly. So it just mathematically doesn't work. Aerodynamically doesn't work. And so I was like, well, it always kind of bothered me because there's so many good books that have dragons in them. The Temeraire series really inspired me. But when I read Temeraire, I loved what Naomi Novik did with it. But then I was like, but they wouldn't be ships. That's too ridiculous. That doesn't work. It'd be aerial combat. And so then I was like, well, how would you do it, Alina? And I thought, well, I would do it with creatures that actually are able to fly. And so the Zahaks came out of that. And they're sort of an amalgamation of birds and pterosaurs, and they have magical breathing powers. And I was okay skipping that. I was like, okay, letting them breathe fire if they could be aerodynamic. So that's what I created, was a sort of new chimera-like animal that has characteristics of actual extinct creatures on Earth. So yeah.
What were the extinct creatures that? So
pterosaurs, for example. Pterosaurs walk kind of on their wrists.
Shows how much I knew about.
Yeah, there's also large birds like Argentavis magnificans, which is an extinct bird with a 26 to 30-foot wingspan, something like that, so quite large. And so you can get prehistoric animals that were of a size that maybe a person could have ridden them in the past. And so I was like, okay, well, what size are we looking at? And then what would they actually be able to carry? And the answer is not much, like one person maybe. And so I was like, okay, well, let's play with the idea then of these animals having different designs so that they can do different things. And that makes them, I think, a little more interesting when you have different capabilities. And so I wrote the Zahaks based partly on birds of prey, because I had worked with birds of prey at a wildlife center for several years when I was younger. And so the fire Zahaks are based on eagles and vultures that are soaring birds, but they're not very fast flyers. The thunder Zahaks are based on falcons. The acid Zahaks are based on accipiters, true hawks like goshawks. And the ice Zahaks are based on Beauty-anine hawks, which are properly called buzzards, but we call them hawks. So a red-tailed hawk would really be a red-tailed buzzard, but that's sort of the basis. So yeah, so that's what I did. I went way into my crazy ornithology love and dug it out for some creatures that were a little bit different, because I don't think anybody really wants birds. I love birds. If they were just riding birds, I'd be fine with it. But I don't think anybody else would be fine with it. I didn't like dinosaurs until they got feathers, and everybody else is upset about the feathers. And I'm like, thank God they finally have feathers. Now they make sense as animals. I love these things. So
it's people are upset at evolution.
Yeah, well, but I like if you look at raptors, like Utah raptor, velociraptor, or when they have feathers now, that was part of the big inspiration for Zahaks. I was like, oh, these dinosaurs with feathers, that sort of is where I was kind of aiming in terms of their appearance. So
gotcha. Were the river Zahaks based on a particular bird?
Yeah, they're based on kites. So which are they're based really on kind of the black kite a little bit, but also which is a very common bird in northern India when I was living there, and kind of on fork-tailed kites as well. So different kites that have that forked tail that I really thought was interesting because it's the most aerodynamically efficient tail design, which seemed really important to put into a novel. I don't know, people are going to fall asleep listening to this now, but
I won't fall asleep. I I like this kind of stuff. So
Okay,
I don't
yeah.
know if people do. I'm sorry that I'm the one hosting it and I'm going to focus on it.
No, so the Rivers of Hawks, I was like, I wanted something with light wing loading. It was really
Mhm.
important for the novel, as you know, because you've read it, that they have a light enough wing loading that they can carry more things. So that was what I was doing.
Yeah, that's what made me think about it, was the note that they can't carry much. And I was like,
But some of them can.
Yeah, some of them can. In the battle scenes in the novels, those Zahaks are a lot of the battles are aerial battles and the such. And so and they're very intricately described. They're very riveting to me. The aerodynamics of it and the gymnastics that the Zahaks are doing is really well crafted and comes across as almost cinematic to me, and kind of being really able to picture these beasts that are right, like I haven't seen, but I can see them doing these things. So what kinds of research did you use to prepare for those elements of the novel, specifically the kind of battle scenes and those dynamics?
Took the least amount of preparation.
Really? Okay.
I spent my entire childhood and much of my teen years and even into my 20s playing military flight sims all the time, because I wanted to be a fighter pilot when I was little. And as a trans girl, I was not allowed to be a fighter pilot, and still couldn't be if I wanted to at this point in our country's history. So I was not being able to do that. I was doing it vicariously through computer gaming and through flight sims. And so I learned all about it. I had a U.S. Air Force pilot friend of mine who trained me on flight sims for like 6 months through all the pilot training that the Air Force goes through. So I went through all of that training to learn all of the techniques and tactics. And so by the time I wrote Stealing Thunder and Gifting Fire, the real issue was taking a lot of that out. Because when I was writing the scenes, I was writing them with the thought of how these things actually play out when it's airplanes fighting each other. And so I was like, oh, she should probably do a lag roll reversal here, and then, make a good turn circle entry to get guns on him. And then I was like, you can't write that. Nobody will know what that means, and it'll sound terrible. So you have to just take that and describe it in a way that's not boring. And really the key is like the less technical detail, the better, I find, in fight scenes. You want to know what it feels like to be there, what it feels like emotionally. You don't really care about what the tactics of it are. So paring down the actual real detail was the hardest part for me. It always is. I always end up having to write fight scenes 2 or 3 times, because the first time through, I write what happens in a technical way. And then I'm like, this is awful, and you have to fix this now. And then I go back and I fix it. So yeah.
Okay. Make it all the more magical, but
we'll just make it more interesting to read, because like otherwise it'd be really boring. And so you have to have it be exciting. But they're all, nonetheless, if you read them, everything that happens in them is logical and would work in real life if you were flying an F-16 or something. So
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So one of the audience questions is pop up, and it's really on topic right now. So I do want to ask it now. Are there more than just fire, ice, acid, thunder, and I'll add rivers of hacks in?
Are there more
in
than
your
just
world?
those
Are there other kinds that we don't know about yet?
Yeah, there's a ton. There's so many, because one of the things that I realized was that, like, when you world build, I think that we're oftentimes really lazy with world building as authors, because we have to be like, not lazy with world building, but like we have to tone it down a little bit. But I think one of the things that I noticed with the Zahaks is, if you had an animal like this in real life, you would have relatives of that animal as well. And so there would have to be like micro Zahaks. Would there be little Zahaks instead of birds? Would birds not be a thing? Would Zahaks occupy the entire place that birds occupy? And so therefore you have like seagull Zahaks that are just too small to do anything with, but they fly around. Would that be what's there? Probably, yeah, actually. So I was like, okay, this is interesting, but you can't put this in the book. We don't need to write an ornithological guide to tiny seagull Zahaks. You don't need that. Nobody wants to read it. Maybe they would want it if it were illustrated or something, but so that was what I was thinking. So with Gifting Fire, what I wanted to do was like say, okay, the Zahaks have to be really important culturally, and therefore knowing about the different species is really important to the nobility. Images of them would be really important because they're symbols of power. Their presence would have to be in society in a really deep and meaningful way. And so I tried to do that when I wrote Gifting Fire, if I were to do more books, yeah, there's absolutely so many crazy hawks that I've come up with based on like sort of the same evolutionary principles and all of that kind of thing, like Caesar hawks that are kind of like a weird albatross design, you know, things like that that would be, you know, I really wanted to do a whole Polynesian society that had Caesar hawks and they were just able to cross the oceans on Caesar hawks. I thought that would be super cool, but that had no place in the series, so I just didn't do it. But in my head, I did it. I was thinking about it, so yeah.
Nice. Yeah, well, you have an audience for the tiny seagulls hawks.
Okay, yeah, I do. Yeah.
One of our audience, and I right as you said it, I was like, I want to see like fan art of these tiny seagulls hawks, or like just the illustration of them, because they're probably both so cute, but also so mischievous. I don't know.
Yeah, they would be really great. I almost put like tiny crows hawks or tiny seagulls hawks in Gifting Fire, actually, and then I just pulled it back out because I was like, I don't think it needs to be there. So.
It reminds me, like this, it's just reminding me, I don't know why I can't get this out of my head now, of the second Jurassic Park movie where the girl is on the beach and there's the tiny little dinosaurs that she finds, and they're not as innocent as they may look, but they're like,
right, exactly.
Yeah, do this. And that's what I'm kind of proportionately imagining in my head as in talking about this. We have another vote for seagulls to hawks.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit, if you're okay with it, about the tone kind of between Stealing Thunder and Gifting Fire. You mentioned it at the beginning, like Stealing Thunder is sort of the fairy tale and Gifting Fire is sort of what comes next in a lot of ways. And I think that for those who have read Stealing Thunder or who will read Stealing Thunder and then move to Gifting Fire, there is a tonal shift and kind of the what is kind of being focused on in the novel and what story elements and all of those things, which always happens, right? This is something books and series kind of do all the time in that way. But I would I would like to know a little bit more about kind of what were the things that you really wanted to do with Gifting Fire that you maybe didn't get a chance to do with Stealing Thunder, or you knew kind of where you wanted the story to go, that you wanted to be maybe a core theme or an element that you were able to dig into in more depth? What were some of those aspects of the story for you?
Well, weirdly, when I wrote Stealing Thunder, I actually had no idea what a sequel would look like. I just had no idea. Normally, when I write a book, I have an idea for a sequel, and Stealing Thunder, I just didn't. I had no idea. And so then it came time to write the sequel, and I was like, interesting. And I realized quite early on in the writing process that, like, Arjun, who's so important to the first book, is too safe a character for Razia to be around all the time in book 2, because it takes all the tension out of the story. Him being there solves too many problems for her. Him being there gives her the sort of emotional and romantic and sort of spiritual fulfillment that she needs as a person. And that sort of really takes away from a lot of the drama and a lot of the tension. And so the first thing I realized was, like, I have to kind of split them up. But, like, I wasn't going to split them up in the, oh, now they're broken up kind of way that a lot of romance novels do. Because, like, one of the things that I liked that I did with Arjun in book 1 was that he was never the guy who's like, I didn't want it to be an enemies to lovers trope, because enemies to lovers doesn't work that well with trans women. They'll just kill us. And then secondly, like, I didn't want it to be a situation where he supposedly loves her, but is willing to drop her over like some mistake or some accident or something. If you really love somebody, you don't act that way, you know? And I hate when books have drama that could be solved with like one open and honest conversation. And like, if two people just acted like humans for 5 seconds, there wouldn't be a problem. And I got a lot of compliments on Arjun for that reason, that he's so faithful and he's so good. And like, ultimately, like, I had one of my friends, and she was like, there's no man like this. He's too good.
He's very good.
He's very good.
Very good.
He's very good. And so, very good can be quite boring in the context of a second book where you need some drama, and the drama can't be manufactured from Arjun. If he didn't dump her in book 1, he's not going to do it in book 2. And so the drama had to come from elsewhere, and the drama came in the form of Kareem and in the form of her father. And naturally, because Kareem is such a central character in book 2, it's a darker book because he's a darker character. And I think too, book one sort of has this fairy tale quality, partly because even though Razia is in danger for being who she is, she's fundamentally got a lot of help and is surrounded by people who are not necessarily directly opposed to her. And she also has the advantage in book one that nobody really thinks she's that smart. And in book two, everybody knows how smart she is and how she caused all these problems in book one and outwitted everyone in book one. So nobody is going to underestimate her in book two. And so book two was actually really difficult to write because smart characters are the worst. I just, from now on, I'm going to write dumb characters, I think, because smart characters, like, you have to have them be smart. And then with the villains, I didn't want them to be dumb. So I had to have the villains be smarter. And then I had to have Razia be smarterer. And that was a lot. That was too much, probably. Because then I would sit there and literally, like, Razia will solve the problem in the next chapter or whatever. She solves them pretty quickly. But there were cases where I just sat there for like 3 days going like, huh. So she's smarter than I am. And that's the problem, is it takes, as the author, you're just like, well, okay, I had her plan. I had to come up with a counter plan to her plan. Now I have to come up with a counter plan to the counter plan. And that takes a lot of mental energy to figure it out. And then to make it look reasonable to the audience and all of that kind of thing. So it was, it's a book that I think does a good job with tension in ways that maybe Stealing Thunder didn't do as good of a job with tension. It was my first published novel. Not to knock Stealing Thunder, it's a good book, but I do think Gifting Fire, I advanced my skills a little bit and did some interesting things with it. So yeah, so it is a darker tone, but I kind of like the darker tone better personally. I'm not, I like happy endings, but I don't think that the happy ending should be for free or should come that easily. So yeah.
I'm 100% with you on that. I really love happy endings, but in stories that I love, there's, it's not always easy to get there.
I also like making you think you're not going to get the happy ending because something really tragic happened and then not doing that to you. Like in Gifting Fire, that one.
Yeah.
My editor was upset reading that draft and was like, wait, but, oh, good. Okay, never mind. So
no,
I think that
if you're talking about what I think you might be talking about, I was very upset for like a little bit.
I'm sure you were. Yeah, for a little bit.
But so, it was fine. It was good. We're all good. We're all happy now.
Everything turned out okay.
Yeah. I do think though, I think I really do appreciate what you're saying about like the way that the smart and the smarter and the smarterer kind of battle, not quite a battle of wits, because that only now evokes The Princess Bride and that whole situation. But it is kind of this constant battle of like who's going to outwit the other and who is not just 3 steps ahead, but 5 or 10 steps ahead. And there, a lot of that is worked out too in the chapters and things like that, where they're having conversations and Razia is sort of like this, oh, but we can't do that because they're going to do this and then this and this and this. But then you see like, there was that one thing that they missed, and that back and forth. And that sort of intrigue, I think, is very central to Gifting Fire in particular and really drives the story quite a bit. I like that people accepted that she was smart. Like she wasn't continually
sanguine of me for women in the world that they accepted that she was smart. But I was like, I kind of thought,
well, like her dad, I don't know. I didn't have high expectations for him as a character necessarily, right. But he at the very least accepted that she was smart, and like people knew that she was a strategist and she was kind of that powerhouse brain essentially. And before I get too far away, like, yes, props to Arjun. He's so good. And I understand why he couldn't be in the second book, but I also do very much appreciate, or
he's just absent for a lot of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I meant. I do just also appreciate when there are male characters that are just good.
Yeah, like, that are just good. Like, you don't have to have some redemption arc. He didn't start off being abusive and then learned better. He was just a good person. Like that.
There was no hemming or hawing.
Important.
Yeah.
I think it's important because I know so many, and we all do it, but it's always like the cishet white guy, and you talk about cishet white men or whatever, you talk about cishet whatever people, and there's this sense of forgetting that I've known some really great cishet men in my life. Mm-hmm. They've been fantastic people, some of them really thoughtful and caring and sometimes more empathetic than I am, and frankly, really decent people. And that sometimes is lost in this sort of, in this constant talk about real problems in society that are perpetuated by groups of people, and particularly small numbers of certain groups of people. But nonetheless, we have a situation where I think it's easy to forget sometimes, like, actually, there are a lot of really good empathetic men in the world, and modeling that is really important.
Yeah, like toxicity and these prejudices are not innate, right? Like they don't have to be something that a character has to like come to terms with or grow out of necessarily. Like it does not, that is not how people are across the board blanketly, but that is, you know, and I love a good flawed character, brooding man that's tortured in a book. Is that any men in my actual life? No, not
that's
really.
A red flag. That's a red flag.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, that's a very much a red flag man, and I will keep reading them, and I'm not going to pretend like I won't be a sucker in the future. But right, like
Kadeem
there are other,
right,
major
like
red
Kadeem,
flag.
right? Like, you know, if I'd written it a different way and had him be rehabilitated, what would I have been saying? I'm not sure, but I think it's one of those things where, you know, that does happen in books, and it does it does open the question of like, well, what are we telling people that they should be on the lookout for? You know, I mean, what are we telling people about traumatic, problematic people and how you should interact with them? I mean, I don't know. So
yeah, and that, I mean, that gets kind of played out a little bit in Gifting Thunder with Lakshmi and kind of her vision of Rahim and kind of Razia's handling of that kind of or approach to handling and like tempering that relationship. Of course, Lakshmi is very smart and she figures things out. But it's definitely, just in general, just my appreciation statement about like when books have these male characters that are not like, they're not overcoming. Like there's not, they don't have to overcome or outgrow red flags, right? Because it doesn't always need to be that way. In a beautiful transition.
Okay.
What is your favorite thing from your research? And I have a feeling this might be a lot, but what is your favorite thing from your research that you wanted to include in the books, but that maybe didn't make it into the final drafts?
Oh my God. The first draft of this book was so different from the actual book that it's, they're indistinguishable almost. Really, it's a totally different book. My editor, I felt bad for because it was like a totally different book. But I think that, so Zind is actually based on a region of Pakistan known as Sindh. And I did so much research on folk religion, Sufism and indigenous Sindhi religious practices that I really wanted to bring into sections of the book. And it all just got cut. I mean, every part of it was cut. And I was really disappointed because I really wanted to have some aspects of rich cultural traditions in that province, right? Because like that's where she's supposed to rule. So I wanted it to be where you got a real sense of the culture there. And I wanted to really delve into some cool cultural ideas, and all of that had to be basically excised. It never made it in because the space constraints in a novel, you can't have a novel be the real world, much as we might wish it were. It has to be a constrained cast of characters. It has to be a constrained set of scenes. It has to be a constrained period of time, generally speaking. I mean, you can make books that go on for generations. There's a lot of time skips that happen, and you can lose readers that way. Maybe I'm the opposite, where it tends to all happen in 3 days or whatever. But I think that that nonetheless, you have to skip a lot. And so there was so much research that just didn't get used at all. And that I wish would have been able to be, shared in some way. But it's one of those things where the story needed to be pared down to a story, and it didn't need to be, a pastiche. So, yeah.
No, I mean, like what you're writing is a craft, and it is something that you are preparing for an audience. I teach not a totally different, but a very different kind of writing. I teach research writing, and, I always talk to my students, I'm like, you're going to find stuff that you're just not going to be able to add in because it's just beyond the scope. And it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And it doesn't mean it's not cool. And it doesn't mean that it isn't informing what you write also. But those are the decisions that get made. But because of that, I'm always interested in what those things are.
There was so much history that got cut out because I was like looking at some actual Mughal history for it. Just there was a ton of stuff that just didn't make it in. And that's okay. That's, that's the nature of the beast. And I'm happy with how the book turned out, honestly. I was very pleased with it when I finished it. So
I understand that entirely. I'm very pleased with how you finished it too, obviously. Just the struggle of wanting to include everything, but never being able to do that is always like a thing. Like,
I'm really bad about that. My casts get so big. And inevitably, I know, like, when I'm doing it, I'm like, oh, you can't really have that many. You're going to have to pare that down. Like, but I'm the kind of person who's like, why can't we have 37 different people in the book? And it's like, well, because the reader gets confused and because you lose the force of the characters that are there and they lose screen time and it becomes this rambling thing. And, sometimes it's really fun to write. But what's fun to write and what's fun to read are sometimes not the same thing. So.
That's fair too. I will say that with the cast of characters, and I'm sure there were still some that you had to cut out by the time when I got to the kind of characters at the end of the novel or the list, I was reading and I was like, there were all these characters and it didn't, it honestly didn't feel like that meant, like it felt more intimate than like, so I guess what I'm saying is you did a really good job at that because I was like, yeah, I remember all of these people, but I didn't realize that there were all of these people. Like as I was reading, it felt very natural how they were coming in and out of the story. All right, so we have a few audience questions that we're going to start moving to. And so please, everyone, keep adding your questions in, keep voting, upvote whichever ones you want to hear. But we're going to start with a question from Hallie. And Hallie asked, in Stealing Thunder, Razia fields Arjun mangoes in a sensual scene. What is the most romantic moment between Razia and Arjun in Gifting Fire?
Between Razia and Arjun in Gifting Fire? Gosh. It's hard to say. There's a really sweet moment at the very beginning of the book. There's a really touching moment in about chapter 6, which is like a parting scene. And then there's obviously like his return at the end of the book. And so I think any of those three would probably be the ones that are, I don't know if they're quite sensual, but they're emotionally meaningful, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I thought maybe one of the romantic is maybe like the parting scene because he's like, you're good. Mm-hmm. Like he trusts her to kind of, I don't know, that to me is romantic.
But that, and I think I liked that scene just because he said, like, whatever happens, I know it's not your fault. Like, I thought that was really important. Like, because there's always this trope, too, of the male character, like, in a situation like this, judging the woman for her behavior when it's beyond her control. And I've seen that trope so many times. And I was just wanting Arjun to put the stamp on that and be like, nope, like, that's not appropriate and it's not fair. And
you're like, don't worry about me when you're the one making yourself more vulnerable in this moment. Like, I think that I find that to be, while not like necessarily a happy moment, a very like touching moment of their relationship. Okay, so Matt has asked, what book would you recommend besides your own to someone who would like to understand you better? So if you were recommending a book based on, like somebody was like, I want to get to know Alina better. And you're like, well, if you read this book, you'll kind of know more about me and who I am and how I came to be who I am today.
A book that's not mine that would help you get to know me personally better. Oh, God. Probably like a field guide to North American raptors or something might be a pretty close choice. Something like that. Read any research book, some crazy research book, and that's probably going to be who I am as a person better. You can, whatever it turns out to be, a history book of any kind, that would probably help. So, but Maybe something like that.
Nice. I know who asked that, and I'm take credit because that was my question.
Okay.
And I ask some people sometimes because I think it's a different way of like, what book would you recommend? It's like it's a different thought.
Yeah, I mean,
or what, and it's not necessarily
I
your favorite book.
Recommend that.
Yeah.
But if you want to know me as a person, like all my friends when they're driving the car with me, I'm like, oh, red tail, and they're like, where? I didn't see that bird. I'm like, oh, it's over there. Or like, oh, look, a couple nice turkey vultures, and then keep driving. So
nice.
Yeah, so I think that probably the field guide of birds would probably tell you. It would tell you more about the hawks anyway. You would be.
That's true.
I see what's going on here. You would know exactly what's up. So
yeah, you got. I really almost used like a horrible like saying in that context, and was going to say 2 birds with 1 stone, and that's a terrible context for that.
That's okay. I use it all the time. Yeah.
that's like, oh, that's extra appropriately inappropriate, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. So Matt also asked, what was your favorite trope to use or to subvert in Gifting Fire?
Oh gosh, there's so many that I know which is my favorite. Oh my gosh, my favorite trope to subvert is there's a trope that you see sometimes in South Asian cinema, and I've seen it in American cinema too, but it's where the new bride has this tyrant of a mother-in-law that eventually the two come to make peace with one another and learn from each other. And I subverted the hell out of that trope. So that was my favorite scene in the book by far. Writing that scene, I was like cackling to myself at the end of that scene. I was so pleased with myself. I said to my friends, like, you will not believe what I just did. It was fantastic. I can't wait for people to read this.
That is,
how did you feel about that
scene? Can confirm that's an excellent scene. And I'm like I'm not generally a person that reads like a lot of, we'll say, violence. I loved that scene.
Okay, great. I was just not sure how that would hit everybody else.
No, it hit me fine. I was like, yes, that is an appropriate
That's how that should have ended.
Situation.
Yeah.
I approve of this message, and like it was like also it was very satisfying. It was just plain satisfying in that moment to me, and like not just for Razia, but for and I'm blanking on the name of who she's with and her team of other hijras. Hina. Like for all of them, I was like, oh yeah, like
finally.
I don't know. I was fine with it. I don't know what that says about me, but I liked it a lot.
I don't know what it says about me that I wrote it, but I was just like, I'm gonna write it. I don't care. So,
and without spoilers, although hopefully that wasn't too close already, I liked some of the following moments and scenes where it was like, yep, did that.
Yeah,
like, yeah, you did.
Yeah. And she I guess like with Razia, like I just think sometimes that we pull punches when we look at like, I think one thing as a trans woman, I see too often inexcusable behavior being excused and being made to feel like, oh, you're overreacting to these things. And
Gotcha.
For example, like all these bills that are being passed against trans children right now all around the country, like the proper response is probably the execution of Republicans. And that's probably the proper response. I'll say that on camera. I don't care. That's probably the proper response. Everybody will think that's crazy. Everyone will think that's an insane overreaction. But when you're torturing children and making it illegal for them to go to the doctor, and in Texas, they're trying to pass a bill that if the parents accept their child's gender identity, the child is taken away from their parents. That's a bill that's been proposed in Texas. It's insane. It's genocide. And the response should be a much stronger response than the response that's actually out there right now. And when you say that out loud, people are like, whoa, you're overreacting. That's too much. But I think that in the book, the stuff that they do to Razia is stuff that should be met with extreme responses. And so she does, and she doesn't feel bad about it. And I think that's cathartic for all of us. So,
I mean, the onslaught of news that has been coming out in the last, not just, the few months, but the legislation that's been in the last month or so has been truly disgusting. And today,
and it's been in the works for a long time, and it's been tried out before many times. That rhetoric's been around for a long time.
It's not
and
new.
It has not been countered to the degree that it needed to be countered. The waters had been tested. They dipped their toe in the pond, and now they're wading deep into it. And our best hope is with the courts, unfortunately. But really, violating people's civil rights like this shouldn't be legal. It's technically illegal, but they'll get a pass on it. So it's one of those things where our society accepts a degree of violence against children, state-sanctioned violence against children, that none of us should be accepting. And the response should be extremely forceful. And yet we oftentimes think, oh, these people are overreacting. I think the Black Lives Matter movement is another example where you see, oh, well, you can protest, but not like that. You can be against this, but not like that. And it's like, well, how else are you supposed to be when this is what you're facing? Your response should be like, this response is subdued compared to what a proportional response would look like. And I think that that's something that really gets me when I write, is that, like, I gave Razia what was effectively a proportional response. And I'm sure that there will be people who are like, whoa, she's crazy, but, like, you know, that's all right.
I mean, like, yeah, I will say how do I phrase this? It's difficult for me to find the words to effectively express how angry it makes me in a way that I feel will do any good. And it's hard that is the moment that's hard. But then at the same time, right, like, I mean, especially the stuff with Black Lives Matter and ideas that this is too much or this response is truly just, I mean, I also don't feel bad saying this on camera. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's on any level right. And I hope that, you know, my, like, hope is that people are learning and, like, following through on desires to learn more and to reassess that. And I know people who have, and I know that when I teach right now, I'm teaching a class on anti-Blackness in the medical industrial complex. And I know that my students learn through that, but it needs to happen on such a widespread level that it's also easy to, or it's easy to feel defeated before you even start. And all, like, I don't know, that's why I do appreciate, like, books like yours and, like, Gifting Fire, where these are books that are about these issues and that are working with these issues, but it's also doing it in this context that is for pleasure and, you know, shouldn't feel like work to people. And the more places that of our culture and society that people can encounter that, like, that is not the end all be all by any means, but one of the things that can happen that can hopefully get people to react more strongly and more consistently. But well, in another one of my brilliant transitions.
No, it's fine. We should transition.
On that note, unfortunately, we could keep talking about this for quite a while, I feel. And not only would that take us away from Gifting Fire, although not entirely away from Gifting Fire, we don't necessarily want to end on that note. But
I mean, yeah,
it's hard to get away from that note, I will say, for me at least right now. And I'm sure it's worse for you in that way. But Hallie would like to know, what is Razia's hardest challenge to overcome as a ruler?
Hardest challenge to overcome as a ruler. Yeah, I think the hardest challenge is finding is proving herself worthy of authority and worthy of respect and worthy of a place in the world that is given to other people for free. And I think that's sort of why I like Razia as a character, is that, like, there's a lot of, like, hidden princess tropes out there in fantasy, or hidden prince tropes out there in fantasy, where, oh, you're the long lost, it's like the classic Ruritanian tale, you're the long lost prince of this place or whatever. But for Razia, like, that's not a good thing. I think that's the trope that gets subverted there. It's not a good thing. And she has to earn the respect of other people. She has to earn the trust of other people. And she has to really work hard to show herself worthy of being elevated to the status that she was supposed to be born with or whatever. And so I think that that's probably her hardest challenge, but I think that's the hardest challenge for many of us anyway, is to prove your worth to other people. As a trans woman, I felt like I've constantly had to prove my worth to other people because it's constantly being challenged legally and in other ways. So I think it's one of those things where I wanted Razia to be this unapologetic trans heroine that you can get behind and who accomplishes great things and who is able to overcome the challenges that she faces, and in the hopes of inspiring maybe younger trans people, but also older trans people, and overcoming their own challenges. So, yeah. And cis people too. You guys have challenges, so
yeah, and different
ones.
Yeah. What if you could take a ride on any kind of Zahak? What one would you want to ride?
As the Thunder Zahak.
Say it again. Sorry, I couldn't hear.
A thunder Zahak. No
okay.
Yeah, no question. They're my favorite. They're based on falcons. I like falcons best, so it would be that one. Yeah, no question. Although the modifications I made to River Zalks are kind of great, and I was really pleased with myself for that. And then I was doubly pleased with Arjun for his idea with the Fire Zahaks, because like that was really quite clever of him. And I say of him because sometimes you write something and then something comes out that you didn't expect or you didn't plan. And that whole thing with Arjun was something I hadn't planned, and it was just his character saying it as I was writing it. Because when I write, it's almost, I don't like to plot things out in advance. And I kind of go into, I almost view it as like an altered state of consciousness a little bit. Like you are just letting the writing flow and you're accessing a part of your brain that is, more akin to the part of your brain that's active when you're like dreaming or something almost. And so it seems oftentimes that you can surprise yourself even though it's all coming from your own brain. And so that was something from Arjun that I was like, oh, good work, Arjun. So
yeah. Good job, Arjun. Yeah. He gets a lot of like good jobs.
Yeah, he gets a lot of good jobs.
Like he just
like a puppy.
Gets a lot of gold stars, and it's always good. I really write like Thunder Zahak, yes, but I'm like really intrigued by the River Zahaks because it also seems like it'd be just a really enjoyable flight.
Yeah, they're really great. They're buoyant. Yeah,
and then now they got some modifications, and you're like, yeah,
that's pretty sweet. I'm glad that you like them so much. I'm glad that the added Zahak made you happy. So,
I am a little bit like you in that I like all of like the little details of things and seeing how things work, and I like those kinds of research particularities that come through. I don't know if it's an academic thing or whatever it is, but I do love all those things. I enjoy them. I love reading books and then going and looking things up because they come in the book and I want to know more about that thing or things like that. So
I really would love to do an illustrated Zahak field guide someday.
That would be so great.
At some point. It would be super
like
fun.
I'm blanking on the name, like who does all the field guides, like the kind of classic, I can picture them in my head, like the
Audubon Society field guides.
Yes, like the Audubon
Society
field guides. We have one at the store that I saw the other day that's like for unicorn. It's like a unicorn field guide and it's designed like it's the 70s. It's really cute.
Yeah, that's really
I would like
something like that would be fun. Yeah.
So not a super awkward transition, but in kind of as we're wrapping up, what's coming up for you? Other than we'll say the illustrated guide to Zahaks. What other projects do you have? We're gonna just keep it in the air of possibility, I guess. Temporarily.
I would love it to happen. So if it happens, that's great. Right now, I have a book out on submission that's a cool personal project that's a YA historical fiction about Leah de Beaumont, the Chevalier d'Eon. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's often misgendered as the Chevalier d'Eon, but she was a trans woman in 18th century France who was a spy. So she was a French super spy. And so I was like, teenage Leah de Beaumont super spy. So it's a trans girl super spy in 18th century France. So she's very much like a Three Musketeers character. And she's got a love interest that she's really into, and the romance centers on her and the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who's a very famous composer of African descent, composer and fencer sort of African descent. So Joseph Boulogne, the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. So it's Leah de Beaumont and Joseph Boulogne as a dynamic duo fighting evil villains in 18th century France. So
I would read the hell out of that book.
Yeah,
in like 5
so I
seconds.
hope it sells, So,
yeah, no, historical fiction, issues of gender, issues of race. French is one of my areas of research.
Yeah,
so
right.
it's like getting on all cylinders.
I went so deep into that because my mom was a French teacher when I was growing up, and so I learned a lot of French history at the time. But when I was really little, I had this book, and in the book they had this caricature. It was a book on spies from like Eyewitness Books or something, and it had this caricature of the Chevalier d'Eon of Leah de Beaumont, half man, half woman, and it explained, that she was this man who cross-dressed as a woman as a spy, and then lived as a woman for like the last 37 years of her life, which they still call her a man somehow. I don't know why. But even the wiki page won't use female pronouns for her, even though last 37 years of her life she lived as a woman. So, but that's all right. And she had herself legally declared a woman, and the King of France paid for her dresses, and Marie Antoinette designed them. But nonetheless, people still call her like man all the time. But
that is not a good deal. But the king and paying for your dresses and Marie Antoinette designing them sounds like a good deal.
It was a great deal until the revolution, anyway. But she basically, I saw this caricature of her when I must have been somewhere between the ages of 5 and 8. I don't really remember how old. I think probably 8 or something like that. And I was just like, oh, is that what I am? And like, she was the first trans woman I ever saw. And so I was like, oh, that's something that exists when I was a child. And I just kept going back to that picture and looking at that picture over and over and over again. I was drawn to it. And so the opportunity to write that story, it came into my head. I was like, that's low hanging fruit. Why haven't I done this yet? And so I wrote that novel, and it's with some editors right now. We'll see if any of them want to pick it up. So,
well, it sounds fantastic to me. I know who Victoria, who's in the audience. She's the one typing, and she said, I need that book in that. And I can tell you the same thing probably went through both of our minds as you were describing it, that we wanted it so bad.
Yeah. It's got 18th century gowns. And I realized that with like pocket hoops, I did all the research on it. You could just stick a sword through there and nobody would see it. And then I was like, you could also stick a blunderbuss in there, and pistols, and like, so like her secret hidden weapons chest of panniers is all over the place. And, it's got all the pretty dresses. It's got the Versailles. It's got coach chases and naval battles and sword fights galore. So, it's a great place to
that sounds awesome. I mean, like, basically old-timey gowns and stuff are essentially like Batman's utility belt.
Yep.
Version.
So they have so much storage space.
There's so much storage space. It's so you can make it very practical.
That's right. So
the solution.
And it included her, and it included another trans woman, the Comtesse de Bar, who was a 17th century trans woman as well. She's in there as like this elderly mentor figure. It's a cool story, and I hope it gets picked up. So we'll see what happens with it. But that was my most recent project. So.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. I'm very excited about it. We are ending on a note where I'm probably going to go and try to research for a little bit, just in anticipation of this book coming out, so I can be prepared and really excited. But thank you, Alina, for joining us and celebrating Gifting Fire with us. It was a really interesting event for me. I'm sure others enjoyed it. There's been a lot of positive stuff in the comments. And I just am excited for more people to read the book, and congratulations again. We are out of time, so we are going to say goodnight, but please remember, everyone, that you can purchase your own copy of Gifting Fire right below me if you hit that little teal button. And this event is rewatchable too, so if anybody wants to kind of go back, and if anybody is willing and go look at the comments or anything like that, you can all just use the same link, and there it'll be. But thank you. I hope everybody has a lovely Thursday evening. And I'm sure everybody is now eagerly awaiting the next book, and sweet dreams full of zahaks and going flying and learning about all of these things. But, those are my dreams about learning about all these things. All right. Have a good night. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.